So another big idea that we're going to be talking about throughout this course is the type of discipline strategies that are used. One of the most important things that has to be kept in mind is the idea of age appropriateness. And I've already mentioned this, and we're going to talk about this chapter after chapter after chapter. But if a child doesn't understand the discipline system that you set up and the guidance that you're trying to give them, nothing will ever be accomplished. So children have to understand what discipline strategies are being used, and the consequences have to be appropriate as well. So, if we were doing a face-to-face class, we'd go around the room and I would ask you what your style of confrontation is. I think it's important to note that every adult has a different style of confrontation. Others, some children would rather the adult basically tell them what they were supposed to be doing. Some children like to pretend they didn't do something, and then until the adult pushes enough, the child will eventually admit that they're wrong. You're going to see different styles of confrontation throughout your experience. There is no one right or wrong answer. It's honestly dependent on you, and it's honestly dependent on the child as well. So the other big idea of this chapter are the 4 styles of caregiving. This will be on the first test. This will be on your PECT exam. This will be on everything that you do taken from this class that's going to be applied to your later classes. Just a random comment that you'll hear me say in many of my classes, doesn't matter what I'm teaching. In most of your college classes, you are only going to remember 7 things plus or minus 2, depending on your intellect. Your more intelligent students who are able to grasp the material better will remember around 8 or 9 things, and your less apt pupils will remember maybe 4 or 5. This idea, the 4 styles of caregiving, you're going to see on the PECT. You're going to see this in your later methodology classes. If you go on to pursue a bachelor's degree, this is a big idea. You need to focus on this. You need to know the styles, and you need to be able to relate theory to this. I will probably have 10 questions on the first exam, specifically on this. This is everything. Your discussion board, on your first discussion board, it's going to be on this. This is important, and I'm going to want you to come up with examples and explain these to me, and explain to me when they work and when they don't work. So the authoritative is what we say that we want all of our teachers to strive for. This is your most effective caregiving strategy. They are high in demandingness, they are high in responsiveness. All messages are simple, they're easy to understand. The strategies, key word here, are developmentally appropriate. The child learns through teaching, not through punishment, and there's more self-responsibility than anything else. So authoritarian is the reverse of authoritative. Authoritarian isn't necessarily a good thing, but the teacher will still be effective in this. Because the teacher's going to be high in demandingness, but they're going to be low in responsiveness. So this is your teacher that sets rules, sets clear expectations, and they rule with an iron fist. They expect the child to follow them. Does this work in high school? Yeah, I think it does. But is it going to work with a room full of first graders or kindergartners? Probably not. It's not a good combination for a teacher to have, but the teacher can still effectively manage a classroom with an authoritarian style. The one thing the research will tell you is that males are more likely to be authoritarian, especially if they were managed poorly by their parents. More male classroom teachers are authoritarian than female are. It's not necessarily a male characteristic, but that is just the way that it is, and that's probably a gender bias. So indulgent is the one that scares me the most. We're going to talk about unresponsiveness. For me, that's your burnt out teacher. But indulgent is the teacher that you can't fix, you can't correct, and it's the one that, as a former administrator, I couldn't stand to be around. I hated indulgent teachers because they were awful with children. Even though they understood child development and were nurturing and caring, they felt bad every time a decision was made that was incorrectly. The child was always right. they were responsive to all the kids' needs. If the kids were crying, if the kids did something wrong, it would cause the teacher to cry. Now imagine that if you're an administrator in a room of, or in a building of 30 or 40 teachers, and you're dealing with an indulgent teacher who every day has a problem. My kid's sad, this child's sad, this child's sad, this child's sad, and they're knocking down the door on your office every single day. You can see from an administrative perspective, this is a problem. Are teachers going to be this way? Yes. Research will show you that most of you that are just starting out, and this is one of the first education classes that you have, there is a natural tendency to be indulgent because you're going to be responsive to whatever the child needs and wants, and you're not going to have a clear understanding of child development to set appropriate limits yet. I'm begging you, when you get into a classroom, do not be this way. You will be public enemy number one of a school administrator because they're going to be spending all their time basically helping you through your issues. Now, then you have this model that is the unengaged teacher. This is the model that I call, and parents too, but this is the model that I call your teacher that is ready to retire, or they're burnt out and they hate the profession. They're collecting a paycheck. They basically, they've lost their love for kids, or they don't like to be around kids. They sit at their desk, they show movies. They don't display passion for caring for children, and they just want to do what they want to do. As an administrator, I could discipline this because they're not doing their job properly. You could look a teacher in the eye and say, well, you clearly don't care about kids. You don't care about your job. So go back a second and ask yourself this. As an administrator, can you say the same thing about an indulgent teacher? You can't, because if you try to tell them they're doing something wrong, they're going to think in their mind, but I'm responsive, I care about children. So that was a challenge for me. And that's kind of why, if you're here, we can fix this. If you're here, you shouldn't be in the profession in the first place, especially if you're just getting started. This is bad for somebody who's in the beginning, but are there adults that are like this? Yes. Are there teachers that are like this? Yes. So you have to keep that in mind. So the last part of this chapter is going to look at, we're going to look at the different types of processes that adults use to influence children. We're going to talk about each one of these, and that's going to be it for the chapter. So modeling, we're going to talk about theorists in chapter 2, but modeling is when a child can perform when they can perform an activity after you do the activity. So you as the adult model appropriate behavior, and then the child can actually do it on their own based on what you are able to do. It's different than imitation, because imitation is when the child actually does the behavior. So they're imitating what you're modeling, but modeling is basically if you see an adult that's doing something appropriate, they're walking in single file lines, their head is up, they're acting appropriately, and the child sees that the adult is modeling good behavior so that the child can imitate it. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we go into depth on Albert Bandura. So direct instruction is very intentional and it's explicit. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good thing or a bad thing. When you hear the term direct instruction, you're going to see models that are used like Success for All. And this isn't a curriculum class, this is more of a behavior and child development class. But one of the things to keep in mind with direct instruction is it's scripted learning, meaning that you're teaching every single child the same exact way, and you're not looking necessarily for individual differences in kids. Good teachers still set the limits, but they change their instructional strategies depending on the student population. You will learn this if you go and you see other school districts. Here is another life lesson. I know we're early on in your academic career. You are going to have the opportunity to go observe in school districts to get this degree. Most people by default go back to where they went to high school and where they went to elementary school in. You are creating a cycle where you are just repeating everything that you did years ago. Not a good idea. If you go to different populations, if you came from a wealthy school district, go to a poor school district. If you came from a poor school district, go to a wealthy school district. See those different perspectives. It is going to make you understand how you have to relate and how you have to work with kids. Some educators will tell you, no, you treat kids the same. No, you don't treat kids the same. Kids have different experiences in different life, in just different life situations that require you to provide them with different types of responsiveness. And I want you to see that as future educators. You will understand that by seeing different populations. So feedback is basically just telling, adults telling a kid how they've done something, and it should always be consistent and given to students. Start of this slide, this is another one that I'm telling you is going to be on the first test. This is important, and this is another big idea in this class. The notion of the 4 different types of feedback. I'm going to expect you to be able to tell me the difference between these. Unconditional feedback that's positive is saying, I love you, great job. You're not giving the child specific praise on what they did a great job for. You're just giving them a blanket unconditional word. I like positive conditional feedback and competency-based feedback for children. I think it's very effective, and you see good teachers model these practices when you're in an elementary school classroom. Good conditional feedback is saying things like, you did a great job on this last test. I appreciate the way that all the students raised their hands and lined up single file to go to lunch. That's conditional feedback. You're giving a condition and you're saying, what the child did correctly. Competency-based feedback is giving them a specific score and telling them what they did. I think this is really good for self-esteem in upper elementary grades. Once again, remember the approach we're taking in this class. I want you to think broad-based. I do not want you to think preschool, kindergarten only. I want you to think early childhood, which in our country is up through 4th grade. Competency-based feedback is phenomenal for 3rd and 4th graders. If a child does well and they earn an A on a test, you say, I'm so impressed that you got a 94% on your exam. Because then you're reinforcing a mathematical practice by telling them the percent, and they can think about that in their head, plus you're giving them feedback based on their competency. Computer-based feedback, you're going to see that on any software that you use in your classes, where the software is telling you what the child did right or what the child did wrong. So, physical environment. You need this to happen before the school day starts. The classroom should be set up, your activities and your lessons should be set up early. When you are working with students for science projects and science labs, one of the best things you can do is set up the lab during lunch while the kids are out in the classroom. The textbook talks about the notion of the morning meeting. When you go do your observations, I'm hoping you get to see morning meetings in action, because I think it's an important way to start the day and really set the physical environment. So, expectations for children should be cooperative, helpful, and I don't have this written on here, but I think this is important as well. Expectations need to be realistic. When you're working with children, you have to be able to expect things that they're capable of doing. A good kindergarten and good 1st grade teacher always make sure that the child knows what's expected, and they make sure that what they are supposed to do is clear. And I can't say that enough. So, change, children understand when it makes sense. If a child doesn't understand change, or if it's sudden, it's going to cause them stress. One of the chapters we're really going to go in depth in this course is this notion of stress and stress management. Change differs from student to student based on the number of incidents and stress that they've experienced in their life. Research will actually tell you that the change that bothers children the most is moving more so than death at a young age. I would argue it's different from child to child, but a move for a child, especially in 2nd, 3rd, or 4th grade, can be highly, highly, highly traumatic for them. And that's going to be something that's going to cause a lot of stress in their lives. Teachers need to be able to understand what change is happening and what change is appropriate. So that's it. This is the first chapter, and I hope this gives you an understanding on basically the lecture style that I'm going to be using for this class, where we're going. Chapter 2 is more theoretical, like I said. We're looking at like an hour, hour and a half lecture for Chapter 2. If you have any additional questions, please let me know. You'll be doing Chapter 2 next week, and you're probably going to need to budget a little more time for that. Thank you.